Somewhere on the coastlines of the Caribbean, Central America, and parts of Florida, there's a tree that Spanish conquistadors nicknamed Arbolito de la Muerte, the little tree of death. It doesn't look particularly threatening. Medium height, shiny green leaves, small yellowish-green fruits that genuinely resemble little apples. In fact, that's exactly what early European explorers called them, beach apples. Except this tree holds the Guinness World Record for the most dangerous tree on the planet, and the list of ways it can hurt you is so extensive that some governments have started painting a warning symbol directly onto its bark, because a written sign alone wasn't considered sufficient protection. This is the Manchineel tree, and understanding exactly why it's this dangerous means walking through a plant that seems to have weaponized almost every possible way of interacting with it. Let's start with the part that sounds almost too absurd to be real: rain. Not touching the tree, not eating anything from it, just standing under it during a rainstorm. The Manchineel sap is so caustic that when rainwater runs down its bark and leaves, it picks up traces of that sap and becomes a genuinely hazardous liquid falling from above. People who've sheltered under a Manchineel tree during a shower have reported their skin blistering, their eyes burning, in some documented cases requiring hospital treatment, all from what should have been perfectly ordinary rain. Christopher Columbus's crew reportedly experienced this firsthand, and historical accounts from the era describe soldiers being temporarily blinded after mistaking the tree for shelter. Now let's talk about the sap itself when you make direct contact. The Manchineel produces a milky white latex that runs through every part of the plant, and this sap contains a cocktail of compounds, including phorbol esters, some of the most powerful skin irritants found anywhere in the plant kingdom. Direct contact with the sap causes immediate, severe chemical burns. Not redness, not mild irritation, actual blistering that can take days to heal and can leave lasting skin damage. There are documented cases of researchers accidentally getting sap on their skin while studying the tree and describing pain so intense it interfered with basic tasks for days afterward. Even touching the bark and then touching your eyes afterward, without any direct sap contact with your eyes themselves, has been reported to cause temporary blindness. Then there's the smoke. If you burn Manchineel wood, and there have been documented cases of people doing this without knowing what tree they were dealing with, the smoke itself carries the toxic compounds airborne. Inhaling Manchineel smoke has caused severe respiratory irritation, coughing fits intense enough to require medical attention, and in some reported cases, temporary blindness from smoke exposure to the eyes. This means the danger isn't limited to the tree's immediate physical footprint. Burning it can turn the toxin into something that travels through the air and affects anyone nearby who had no direct interaction with the plant at all. But arguably the most dangerous aspect, the one responsible for the tree's most serious injuries, is the fruit. Those small green beach apples smell sweet, genuinely appealing, similar to a crab apple, and this is precisely what makes them so lethal. Unsuspecting people, particularly tourists unfamiliar with the tree, have picked up fallen fruit and taken a bite out of simple curiosity. The very first symptom is usually a burning, peppery sensation in the mouth that intensifies rapidly rather than fading. This is followed by severe swelling of the throat, which can become so pronounced that it partially closes the airway. Documented case reports describe victims struggling to swallow for days afterward, with intense pain that resists most standard treatment methods. Depending on the amount consumed and the individual's reaction, the swelling has, in some historical cases, been severe enough to be life-threatening on its own, independent of any other toxic effects. Here's a detail that captures just how well this tree seems engineered for danger. It doesn't discriminate by species. Very few animals will eat the fruit or bark, and this isn't incidental, it's evolutionarily significant. One of the extremely rare exceptions is the black-spined iguana, a species that has apparently developed some tolerance and will occasionally eat the fruit and even shelter in the tree's branches without apparent harm, making it one of the only known animals on the planet that can interact with the Manchineel with relative safety. For virtually every other creature, including humans, cattle, and most local wildlife, the tree represents pure, undifferentiated danger with essentially no upside. So why does a plant develop this many overlapping, redundant ways of causing harm? The evolutionary logic actually makes sense once you consider where the Manchineel typically grows: sandy coastal areas, beaches, and dunes, environments that are inherently unstable, prone to erosion, and exposed to constant environmental stress from salt spray, shifting sand, and storms. The Manchineel plays a genuinely important ecological role in these fragile coastal ecosystems. Its root systems help stabilize sand dunes and prevent coastal erosion, protecting the land behind it from encroaching seawater and storm surge. In other words, this brutally toxic tree is also, somewhat ironically, one of nature's most effective coastal guardians, and its extreme toxicity may have evolved specifically because losing individual trees to grazing animals or careless damage in that harsh, exposed coastal environment would have been evolutionarily catastrophic for a species that plays such a structurally important ecological role. This creates a genuinely strange paradox that conservationists actually have to navigate. The Manchineel is simultaneously one of the most dangerous organisms most people will ever encounter and a legitimately important, sometimes even protected, species in certain coastal ecosystems. You can't simply eliminate it from beaches where it grows without potentially accelerating coastal erosion and destabilizing the exact environments that depend on it. The solution most affected regions have landed on isn't removal, it's warning. Trees are frequently marked with a painted red ring, a skull and crossbones symbol, or a written sign in multiple languages. And in especially high-traffic tourist areas, some Manchineel trees have literally had "do not touch" instructions painted directly onto the trunk, because relying on people to recognize an unfamiliar tropical tree species by sight alone was determined to be an unacceptable risk. What makes the Manchineel particularly worth understanding, beyond the impressive list of specific dangers, is what it represents as a case study. A plant that evolved every conceivable defense mechanism simultaneously: contact toxicity, ingestion toxicity, airborne toxicity, even a kind of toxicity that gets weaponized by something as passive as falling rain. Most dangerous plants specialize in one primary defense. Something is either poisonous if eaten, or irritating if touched, or dangerous if inhaled. The Manchineel appears to have stacked nearly every available biological defense mechanism onto a single organism, creating something that's less like a typical toxic plant and more like a species that seems to have anticipated every possible way a curious or careless creature might interact with it, and preloaded a punishing response for each one. So the next time you're picturing what the most dangerous organism on Earth might look like, it's worth remembering it's probably not a venomous snake coiled and ready to strike, or a predator with visible teeth and claws. It might just be a quiet, unassuming tree standing near a beautiful beach, with shiny leaves and small green fruit that smell faintly sweet, patiently waiting under a clear blue sky for rain to fall, for a fire to be lit nearby, or for someone curious enough to reach out and touch it.